Good morning, good afternoon or good evening. This is Miss Ferguson. This is me talking you through a PowerPoint which should be made available to you. It can be on request. But this is talking about the Component 3, Section A, and it reviews some of the top tips that I give to my students in terms of how to structure it and how to work through, and just key things to keep in the back of the mind to hopefully keep them calm. So, we are looking at our agreed structure in terms of harping back to Greek times, in terms of thinking about the Parthenon. And this metaphor explains how to structure our responses within this so that we hopefully get to the sophisticated and concise response. So, what we are looking for in terms of how we get to those top marks is thinking about my AS-RAKE acronym in terms of making sure we get the right skill set represented within our response within the paper. So, AS-RAKE standing for addressing the question. If I could, I would have that appear twice, but it is kind of represented in the structure that I go through later. So, addressing the question, talking about specific moments, talking about within the range of paragraphs a range of dramatic elements that are focusing and are actually focused on the question's requirements, and also making sure we get analysis, key terms and evaluation with our response as well. So what does this look like? This should be represented in the columns of your answer, as it is something that holds up our response in terms of giving it a good solid structure. And in order to have a good solid structured prepared argument, you have to have nice straight columns representing that they have to have balance within all of the different areas within them. So we have our columns representing our paragraphs. We're aiming for 6, however we understand that that is quite ambitious. Key terms should, in terms of this bit though, be used throughout. That is a given. But hang on, miss. What does it mean by a range? Well, what I mean by a range is it shouldn't just focus on one dramatic element only. So if it has a design-based statement, then you must focus on a range of different areas of design and design examples. So within your paragraph you have to discuss, analyse, evaluate specific moments in the production. So at the moment we're doing a production analysis that involves a car scene. But it should be one moment per paragraph in detail. But say for example the question or statement was related to characterization, paragraph 1 could be about use of voice, someone's use of voice within it, and there we are represented here in terms of talking that specific moment where this was effective and is an example that is connected to that statement that you are agreeing or disagreeing with. But then this second paragraph should be about a different element related to characterization. So if it was the use of proxemics that X person used and this agrees or disagrees with the statement, and is a good example of what you were asking me for. So just as a key reminder though, the AS-RAKE acronym works as a holistic checklist to connect the paragraphs. It is not necessarily something that you have to follow in that specific order, and the R branches across all of your paragraphs, as you can see. The acronym is not supposed to be indicative of the order. So coming back to representing this and thinking about where does it all go then? How does it all fit as one big whole? So in terms of the entire essay question, you may well see my cat in a second. you have to think about, first of all, you need to start off with your introduction that links in some way, starts with an angle, an agenda, potentially, on the statement or question you're arguing for, against, or not too sure about yet. Then, this is then where you write your introduction for your sub-argument. So, if your argument is about something like engagement of young people, this is where you talk about your one of your branches of that argument. Then this is where you put your as ache. Note I'm excluding the R because we haven't worked on enough paragraphs to get a range yet as required, and that is within the body of your paragraph. And then you should summarise your sub-argument that you introduced at the beginning of this paragraph, and then you move on to your second one. So overall, you do as many paragraphs as you can. My recommended is 6 within the 45 minutes that you get. However, I appreciate that is quite ambitious, but that would really cover the ball. And then you must conclude your essay to end with. So, in practice, if this was my question I had chosen, so note I get a choice of 2 within this section, theatre makers today rely too much on technology to impress audiences. So I would then think about my sub-argument. So the heart of the question here is really about technology. So by technology, I'm thinking it means in terms of non-actor based elements, possibly things like special effects, but it might provide a counter-argument if I do pick something that's not actually technology within the remit of this statement, because I could argue that no, this actually relied more on something that wasn't technology, and that in its own right was quite impressive. So this is where I would start to think about my 6 paragraphs that I will eventually create, in terms of each one representing a different facet of my arguments, whether it was one being in line with it, one being disagreeing of it. So my paragraph 1 might look like this, in terms of, I think about the set as an example. So in the one that we're currently looking at, we've agreed that potentially it wasn't necessarily intended to impress as such, and we would talk about that actually it was more of a Brechtian device in terms of a gestic element, in terms of representing escapism. That's our specific one at the moment, and I would go into detail about that and talk about that in relation. And that is basically hitting us, acknowledging the question and acknowledging why this is indeed a suitable bit of evidence for that. Then I'd talk about its meaning and analyse and say what it showed. That is essentially, in a nutshell, what analysis means. This showed, this represented, this was to suggest, this conveyed, this denoted, etc., etc. And then talk about whether or not actually that actually was effective as a device, as this element, and talk about whether or not actually they should have done something more to that, or they could have extended that, or they should have not have had that and substituted it for this, and this would have made more of an impact because. So this is where you could suggest perhaps a more naturalistic approach, or something else that's tangible that you can argue would possibly be better if indeed you're saying it wasn't effective. Or if you just want to be cheeky, say, yeah, it was effective, but this would have made it more effective, and this would have had the impact of. So then you talk about coming back to that question. So this is where you're topping off your column in terms of that pictorial diagram, and you're saying, so in essence, in this example of a production that I saw, it wasn't meant to impress, but it did a different job. So, there you are, as you have it, you would hopefully then go on to write your second paragraph, and eventually come to the conclusions from what you have gathered as your evidence and you've analysed. That is it for this video. If you've got any questions, please come and see your drama teachers.